In a climate-controlled case in Jerusalem, behind glass that has not been opened in decades, there is a strip of blackened animal skin no larger than your hand. The Aramaic written on it is older than any page of any gospel. Most people who pass it read the label and keep walking. What the writing describes is a prison, not in heaven, not in some spiritual underworld. A prison dug into the ground, in a desert you can still drive to today, holding something the text insists is chained there right now. The book it comes from was thrown out of the Bible. Church leaders condemned the Book of Enoch at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. Banned, buried, called dangerous. For 16 centuries, it stayed that way. Then, in 1947, in the caves at Qumran, it came back. 11 separate copies of Enoch surfaced in the Dead Sea Scrolls. More copies than Deuteronomy, more than Exodus, more than most books that stayed in the Bible. And the oldest fragments describe something no council wanted read aloud. A fallen being, bound hand and foot, sealed under rock in a named desert east of Jerusalem, left there until the end of the world. Not a myth, not a metaphor. The text names him. It names the place, it gives the method of binding, and it records why the seal cannot be broken until the day of judgment. In the next several minutes, you will see exactly what the text says, the real location on the map it points to, and why access to the oldest surviving manuscripts of it has been restricted since 1974. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. The passage is not buried in some obscure appendix. It sits in the opening movement of the book, the section scholars call the Book of the Watchers, chapters 1 through 36. The binding itself is chapter 10. The fragment under that glass in Jerusalem is cataloged 4Q201, the oldest Aramaic copy of Enoch ever found, dated to roughly 200 BCE. That makes it older than any text in the New Testament. The complete version survives only in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia. Kept in manuscripts, the Ethiopian church guarded for over 1,000 years. R.H. Charles rendered it into English in 1906. Michael Knibb produced the standard scholarly edition in 1978. Ephraim Isaac translated directly from the Ethiopian manuscripts in 1983. All three preserve the same scene. And the scene does not read like Scripture. The level of detail is wrong for ancient religious literature. Apocalyptic writing deals in symbols, beasts, trumpets, lampstands, things that stand for other things. This passage does not behave that way. It gives you a location, it gives you a construction method, it gives you materials, it gives you a physiological detail about the prisoner. It reads less like a vision and more like a work order. A first-person account of a site, written by someone recording what was done and where. And this is where it gets disturbing. What we're looking at breaks into three parts: the instruction, the sentence, and the visit. It begins with the instruction, chapter 10, verses 4 and 5. The text has God speak to the archangel Raphael, bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness. Make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him therein. Place upon him rough and jagged rocks. The surface reading is simple divine punishment, a wicked spirit sent away. But read it as procedure: an opening made in the ground, in a specific named desert, a body lowered, rough, jagged rocks placed on top. That is not how you describe a spiritual condition. That is how you describe an excavation you never intend to reopen. He gives the terrain, he gives the material, he gives the sealing method. He had no reason to. But the text doesn't stop there. The same passage adds a detail that changes the tone entirely. Cover his face that he may not see the light. Read that again. You do not blind something that cannot see. You do not shield the eyes of something that is dead. The instruction assumes a prisoner who is aware, who can perceive light, and who is deliberately kept from it in total darkness, not destroyed, not erased, sealed, conscious, in the dark. What follows in chapter 10 is stranger still, because Azazel is not the only one sentenced, and he is not sentenced the same way. Verses 11 and 12 turn to Semjaza, the leader of the Watchers, and the rest of them. Bind them, the text says, for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, until the day of their judgment. Two things land at once: the valleys of the earth, subterranean, below the surface, and a number, 70 generations, a fixed term. This is the part most readers miss. Azazel is sealed forever. The Watchers are given a sentence with an expiration date. That is not one prison. That is a facility with two different classes of inmate, permanent and temporary, held indefinitely and held pending trial. And then comes the part that shouldn't be possible. Chapter 21. Enoch does not report the binding secondhand. He is taken to see it. And I saw, he writes, a place where there was neither a heaven above nor a firm earth beneath, but a chaotic and terrible place. He describes a void with no sky and no floor, columns of fire descending, beings bound in it. He is not interpreting a symbol. He is standing somewhere, describing what is in front of him in first person, past tense, the way you would describe a place you had physically walked into. He counts 7 stars bound together in that place, like great mountains burning in fire, and an angel tells him this is the prison of the ones who broke the command. He had no way to know what the inside of the earth looks like. No ancient human had been below a few hundred feet. Yet, he describes a deep place of fire and confinement, and he describes it like a witness. Here's what the translators left out. Every standard English edition keeps that one word untranslated and moves on. Dudael. They print it as a place name, a proper noun, and let it sit there empty. But the word is not empty. In Hebrew and Aramaic, the root breaks into dud, meaning cauldron, kettle, or pot, and el, meaning God. Dudael, the cauldron of God, a sealed vessel built to hold heat and pressure and never let it out. The translators handed you a place name. The word underneath it describes a container, and the prisoner's own name does the same thing. The rabbis of the Talmud, in Tractate Yoma, read Azazel as Azaz, meaning rugged or rough, and El, meaning strong, the rugged rock. The place is named for a sealed vessel. The prisoner is named for stone. The text moves on, but the implication sits there, and Dudael is not nowhere. This is where it stops being abstract. In the Mishnah, the oldest layer of rabbinic law, Tractate Yoma, names a cliff called Beth Hadudo in the wilderness east of Jerusalem. It is the cliff from which, once a year on the Day of Atonement, a goat was thrown to its death. Leviticus 16 calls that goat the one sent for Azazel, the scapegoat. Every year, the holiest ritual on the calendar loaded the sins of an entire nation onto a goat and drove it into the desert, to a cliff whose name is the twin of the prison in Enoch, dedicated by name to the being Enoch says is chained beneath it. Scholars including R.H. Charles, Lester Grabby, and Daniel Stoke have all traced the same overlap. The place of the scapegoat and the place of Azazel's binding are, in the words of one study, conspicuously similar and likely from a common origin. The ritual geography of the Day of Atonement may be a memory of where the text says the prison is, and that place is real. It sits in the Judean desert southeast of Jerusalem, on a barren ridge that today carries the name Jabal Munttar. On the map, it is still called the Mount of Azazel. What modern readers don't realize is how closely this matches what science found beneath the ground. In December 2018, after 10 years and more than 1,000 scientists across 52 countries, the Deep Carbon Observatory announced the results of a global survey of life inside the Earth's crust. They drilled 2.5 kilometers into the seafloor. They sampled from mines and boreholes more than 5 kilometers deep. And they found a living world nobody knew was there. They called it the deep biosphere and a subterranean Galapagos. Barely alive bacteria, they described, in their own words, as zombies. Organisms sealed in solid rock, cut off from the surface, alive but not growing, spending nearly all their energy simply maintaining their existence. Some with life cycles running into the millions of years. Karen Lloyd, one of the project's lead scientists, put it plainly in the published findings. In many places, she said, these organisms invest most of their energy simply into maintaining their existence, and little into growth. Bound beneath the earth, not dead, not free, just persisting in the dark on a clock no human mind can feel. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE, and it never stopped. The council struck Enoch from the approved list. Jerome, assembling the Latin Vulgate, dismissed it as unworthy of serious use. Augustine, in the City of God around 410 CE, argued its accounts of bound angels were confused and unreliable, and warned readers away. But the Ethiopian church, outside Rome's reach, kept it in scripture and copied it by hand for over 1,000 years. When the Scottish explorer James Bruce carried 3 GA's manuscripts back to Europe in 1773, the binding chapters drew immediate unease because they did something abstract theology never did. They pointed at a specific desert. An abstract prison in an unnamed underworld threatens no one. A prison with a location, a name, and a cliff you can stand on is a testable claim, and the Dead Sea copies that could have settled it were held back. The Aramaic Enoch fragments from Qumran, including the oldest binding texts, sat unpublished for decades. Their full scholarly edition did not appear until 1976, nearly 30 years after discovery. Now, here's where it gets active. The desert the text points to is not quiet. Since 2017, the Israel Antiquities Authority has run a continuous operation combing the caves of the Judean desert, the same wilderness east of Jerusalem, rappelling into cliffs and clearing chambers before looters reach them. In 2021, they announced the first new Dead Sea Scroll fragments recovered in roughly 60 years, pulled from a cave in that desert. An active state operation is working the exact terrain, the text names, and what it finds is cataloged, restricted, and released on the state's schedule. The oldest complete manuscripts of the binding remain in Ethiopia, behind church walls, under restrictions tightened after 1974. Scholars have applied for direct access to specific GES readings and been turned away. The document that names the prison and the ground the prison sits under are both, right now, controlled. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying there is a literal fallen being chained under a cliff outside Jerusalem, breathing in the dark, waiting for the end of the world. The Book of Enoch is not a survey report, and it is not a set of coordinates. But what the text describes, when you read it slowly, keeps matching what the ground keeps giving up. A named desert that turns out to be a real ridge on the map. A prison whose name means sealed vessel, being kept alive rather than destroyed, in darkness under rock. And a modern survey that found living things sealed under rock, alive, kept on clocks measured in ages. He had no drill, he had no borehole, he had no way to know the crust of the earth holds anything alive at all. And yet, the text sits there, in Ge'ez and in Aramaic, in fragments recovered at Qumran, saying what it has said for more than 2,000 years. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the text names a real desert, if that desert is the same cliff the Day of Atonement sent its scapegoat to by the same name, dedicated to the same being, if the ground itself holds life sealed under rock, alive, waiting on a clock we cannot feel, and if a text older than the Gospels describes all of it in plain procedural language, then it is not mythology. It is documentation. Enoch went somewhere, or was shown something, that gave him knowledge no one in that age should have had. And he recorded it the way you'd record a burial you were told never to reopen. The prison he describes, the opening in the desert, the jagged rocks, the covered face, the being kept in the dark, is either a symbol we have misread for 2 millennia, or it is exactly what he says it is. The fragment sits under glass in Jerusalem. The Ge'ez manuscripts sit behind stone in Ethiopia under restriction. The deep cultures and cores sit in laboratories, alive and cataloged. And the ridge sits east of Jerusalem in the Judean desert, unmarked except for the old name it still carries. The rocks are still there. The seal, the text says, is still shut, and whatever it says is chained beneath them is still chained, still in the dark, still waiting for the judgment, exactly the way Enoch said it would be. The evidence is still in the ground. The investigation into what else was removed from Scripture is playing on your screen now.